The Back to the Future trilogy is one of my favorite film trilogies. While these films are not perfect, I absolutely love them for being amazing stories about time travel. So when I went looking through YouTube to try to find a Back to the Future iceberg, I surprisingly couldn't find one. So that's why we're here today to talk about my Back to the Future iceberg, where we'll dive into 4 deep tiers of Back to the Future lore. But enough wasting time, let's get into the iceberg. Films. Of course, when talking about Back to the Future, the first thing that comes to mind is the original trilogy, Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. Video games. Back to the Future has had a bit of a mixed history when it comes to its video games. A lot of these games were released in the 80s and 90s on the NES and the Atari, but a lot of them were notorious for being very bad. There was one decent game, but it was only released on the Nintendo Famicom in Japan, meaning that a lot of people didn't get to play it. But easily the best game to come out of this franchise was released in 2010 by Telltale Games, which was Back to the Future the game, considered by many fans to be the closest thing we'll ever get to a Back to the Future 4. The animated series. Released back in 1991, where every hit movie had an animated cartoon, Back to the Future the Animated Series is a Saturday morning cartoon adaptation of Back to the Future. As someone who's actually seen this show, it's everything you'd expect from a Back to the Future cartoon, and it's a lot of fun. However, what is really interesting about this show is that it actually led to the creation of Bill Nye the Science Guy. The real Bill Nye would appear at the educational segments of each episode, and after a while of working on the animated series, he was pitched the idea of having his own educational show where he could teach kids about science. Back to the Future: The Ride. Also released in 1991, Back to the Future: The Ride was a simulator ride in Universal Studios Orlando, Florida. The ride is fondly remembered by fans, and aside from Back to the Future the game, which I mentioned earlier, the ride is also considered to be one of the closest things we'll ever get to a Back to the Future 4. Unfortunately, the ride was closed in 2007. Lego. Back to the Future and Lego have had several crossovers in the past. We've gotten a few Back to the Future Lego sets, and we've even gotten a crossover with the game Lego Dimensions. In fact, there was actually a commercial where they got Christopher Lloyd to play Doc Brown, opening a Lego set. Comics. The Back to the Future franchise has had a fair share of comic books, with most of them being released by IDW. Deleted scenes. The Back to the Future trilogy is an absolute goldmine when it comes to deleted scenes. You'd be surprised with how many really funny and really good deleted scenes were cut from the final product. While none of these scenes were really essential, I still think they were really good, and I really wish we had a director's cut of some kind. Back to the Future the Musical. Released in 2020, Back to the Future the Musical is exactly what it sounds like. It's a musical featuring all your favorite characters and is based on the first Back to the Future movie.
Hey Doc, you better back up. We don't have enough road to get up to 88.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Back to the Future 4. Back to the Future 4 is the long-awaited sequel that will never happen. There's a lot of reasons as to why a Back to the Future 4 will never happen. A lot has changed since the original trilogy. Christopher Lloyd has said that unless director Robert Zemeckis is involved, he's not going to be a part of a Back to the Future 4. And the creators of Back to the Future, Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, have both stated that there will never be a Back to the Future 4. Eric Stoltz. Before Michael J. Fox was casted as Marty McFly, he was originally played by actor Eric Stoltz. However, after a few weeks of filming with Eric Stoltz, Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis knew that he just wasn't the right choice for Marty. Then, after many contracts and deals, Michael J. Fox was finally able to play Marty. Production hell. It's infamous by this point that Back to the Future didn't have the smoothest production. At the time, Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis were not very successful when it came to making movies, so having them lead a very expensive production would be very, very risky. And that's not even mentioning all the other problems they had behind the scenes and getting Michael J. Fox to play Marty McFly. You see, before Michael J. Fox was casted as Marty McFly, he was originally in a show called Family Ties. Unfortunately for Michael J. Fox, he really wanted to do Back to the Future, but because of his contract, he was forced to work on Family Ties. But thankfully, after Eric Stoltz was fired as Marty McFly, Universal made a lot of deals and negotiations, and finally were able to get Michael J. Fox to play Marty. However, this twist of fate would come at a cost, and that was Michael J. Fox's sleep schedule. In order to be in Family Ties and Back to the Future at the same time, Michael J. Fox would have to act in both of them back to back. That might not sound like a lot, but working on two productions at the same time must have been very exhausting, and having little to no rest couldn't have helped with that. And those are really just some of the surface level problems behind the scenes of Back to the Future. If you want to learn more about the troubled history of the movies, I'll leave some links to videos in the description further explaining them. George McFly recast. During the production of Back to the Future 2 and 3, actor Crispin Glover, who had played George McFly, was offered the chance to reprise his role. And there's a lot of skepticism and reasons as to why, but Crispin Glover turned down the role and didn't want to return for 2 and 3. Some sources say that he was asking for way too much money, and other sources were saying that he wasn't going to be paid that much for being in the rest of the trilogy. Regardless of the reason, George McFly would be recasted in the rest of the trilogy, and his role in the movies would be significantly reduced. The whole reason that George McFly was dead in the future segment of Part 2 was because they couldn't get Crispin Glover. They also put a lot of prosthetics on a look-alike of Crispin Glover in the movie, and that didn't fly too well with Crispin Glover, and according to him, it was illegal. Now, there is a lot of information to take in when it comes to this controversy, so I'm not going to talk about it all here, otherwise we would be here all day. But if you do want to learn more about it, there are a lot of videos on YouTube explaining it more in detail, and like the production hell, I'll leave links to it in the description. Power of Love cameo. In the music video for Huey Lewis's Power of Love, Doc Brown shows up to one of his concerts in the DeLorean. Jimmy Kimmel Special. On the special day of October 21st, 2015, the Jimmy Kimmel Show had a very special episode where we got to see Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd return as Marty McFly and Doc Brown. In the special, Doc and Marty react to the new 2015, which isn't as futuristic as they thought it would be. Alternate drafts. The original Back to the Future went through a lot of development stages, and there were a lot of rejected scripts and drafts. One of these early drafts had to do with the Vietnam War, and a lot of them had to do with nuclear testing, because the original idea behind the time machine was that you needed a nuclear explosion to actually time travel. This was later changed so that you would need plutonium, but not a nuclear blast. Transformers crossover. A very unlikely crossover happened in the Back to the Future comics with Back to the Future and Transformers. In this crossover series, the DeLorean is turned into a Transformer named Gigawatt. Levi Strauss. In some overseas versions of Back to the Future, Marty's underwear and nickname is changed from Calvin Klein to Levi Strauss. Spaceman from Pluto. Behind the scenes of Back to the Future, the CEO of Universal at the time wasn't satisfied with the name Back to the Future, and he insisted that the name should be changed to Spaceman from Pluto. He argued that this was a better name for the movie because of the comic that the kid has in 1955. Thankfully, everyone at Universal and everyone that was working on the movie disagreed with him, and the name Back to the Future is what the movie is still called to this day.
Shark still looks fake.
Tell me, doctor, where are we going this time? Is this the 50s or 1999?
Original Time Machine. Before the time machine was a car, it was originally supposed to be a refrigerator. But this was later changed by the creators because they were afraid that kids would try to climb into their refrigerators after seeing the movie. Here's a bit of a bonus entry. Supposedly, Michael J. Fox recorded a PSA for Australia after finding out that kids were grabbing onto cars and skateboarding. This was supposedly extremely illegal in the country, but I couldn't find the actual PSA. It may be lost media. Back to the Future canon. This entry refers to the confusion around what is and isn't canon in the Back to the Future universe. I usually wouldn't say this, but I think that everything in the Back to the Future franchise should be considered canon. The reason I say this is because Back to the Future is a franchise about time travel and alternate timelines. So in a way, every cartoon, comic, cameo, or game could fit into the Back to the Future timeline and canon, because this is a series about time travel and alternate timelines. Pizza Hut sunglasses. During the release of Back to the Future 2, Pizza Hut did a promo where they'd give people these really cool looking sunglasses that were supposed to be from the future. Jaws 19. Jaws 19 is a mockbuster in the Back to the Future universe. As a bonus feature in the 30th anniversary DVD, they actually included a fake commercial for Jaws 19, showing a lot of fake and ridiculous titles for Jaws movies. Susie Parker. Susie Parker was the original name for Jennifer, and it was in a lot of early drafts for Back to the Future. Time Travel, Fact, Fiction, and Future with Michael J. Fox. Time Travel, Fact, Fiction, and Future was a documentary featuring Michael J. Fox, explaining the history and fiction behind time travel. Doc's machine worked. Remember in the first movie how Doc Brown had a machine that could read people's minds? Well, if you look really closely at the dialogue, you'll see that it actually worked to some extent.
I'm gonna read your thoughts. Let's see now. You come here from a great distance?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't tell me. You want me to buy a subscription to the Saturday Evening Post?
No.
Not a word now. Donations. You want me to make a donation to the Coast Guard Youth Auxiliary?
Earlier in the movie, Marty was reading a newspaper to try to find out what decade he was in, so the newspaper must have still been on his mind. Earlier in the movie, people were questioning as to why Marty was wearing a life jacket, and at the beginning of the movie, there's a woman who tries to convince him to donate to save the clock tower. While his mind-reading machine didn't work flawlessly, it did work to some extent. How Marty and Doc met. One of the biggest questions in Back to the Future is why a teenager is hanging out with an old man. Believe it or not, one of the Back to the Future comics actually explains it, giving us an origin story. In a nutshell, Marty's bully Needles forces him to break into Doc Brown's house and steal something. When Doc catches Marty in the act, he doesn't punish him, but instead admires him for his resourcefulness and then offers him a job as his assistant. The two eventually become close friends, and it explains how they met in the first place. Tom Holland reboot. A while back, a deepfake video went viral for giving us a glimpse as to what a Back to the Future movie featuring Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr. could look like. This video led to a lot of discussions as to whether or not they should make a Back to the Future reboot featuring Tom Holland, but Tom Holland himself actually objected against the idea. When asked about whether or not he would do a Back to the Future reboot, Tom Holland denied, saying that the original was perfect and it cannot be improved.
So when do we start shooting?
So you're down.
No, that's one of the only perfect movies ever made, and we couldn't do it any better.
Okay, so
Tom Holland's viewpoint on a possible reboot actually falls in line with what the original creators wanted, since they didn't want there to be any reboots or sequels. Here we are at the final tier of the Back to the Future iceberg, where I saved the best for last. Earth Day Special. Released on April 22nd of 1990, Time Warner produced an Earth Day special that featured a Back to the Future segment. In the special, Doc Brown uses the DeLorean to travel to a random hospital, where for some reason he tells a lot of doctors and nurses that the Earth isn't looking too good in the future. He warns them that the future of Earth isn't looking so good and we need to take care of the planet. The Back to the Future segment of this Earth Day special doesn't make a lot of sense, but it was a part of a much bigger 2-hour-long Earth Day special, so there is a lot of context that I'm just not going to explain here. Although, considering all the context, I'm not really sure how this fits into the Back to the Future timeline. Shemp. Before Doc Brown had a pet dog named Einstein, he was originally going to have a pet chimpanzee named Shemp. However, this was changed because an executive at Universal told Bob Gale that movies with monkeys didn't make a lot of money. Plot holes. I'm no time travel expert, but the Back to the Future movies do have their fair share of plot holes. In Back to the Future 3, there are technically 2 DeLoreans in the Old West. one that Doc hid in a cave and another that Marty used to time travel. While the DeLorean that was in the cave couldn't time travel, it must have had some fresh gas in it that Marty and Doc could have used to fuel the other DeLorean. At the end of the first movie, when Marty changes the past, Marty should have either changed into a different Marty and disappeared, or there would have been a second Marty in 1985. Despite my love for the movies, there are a lot of plot holes in this series. Biff is Marty's father. By the title, you could probably guess what this entry is about. The theory states that in the original 1985 timeline, Biff and Lorraine have an affair because George McFly wasn't the best husband. Because of this, Marty is born and is much different than George. There are some interesting aspects of this theory, but it's pretty easily debunkable because there's a lot of evidence that just points to Marty being George's son instead of Biff's. Marty's jacket in the antique store. In the 2015 antique shop, there are a lot of awesome Easter eggs. Through the glass, you can see Marty's jacket and tape recorder from the first movie, an NES game of Jaws, and a plush of Roger Rabbit, another movie that Robert Zemeckis directed. John F. Kennedy symbolism. A conspiracy theory released by the channel Barely Human, the video was a collection of weird symbolism regarding the John F. Kennedy assassination in the Back to the Future movies. The theory itself can get very ridiculous at times, but I must admit there are a few instances of symbolism that are a little uncanny. Red Thomas. A minor character in the first movie, Red Thomas was the mayor of Hill Valley in 1955. There is a very popular theory stating that Red might be the homeless man that is seen throughout the movies. You see, when Marty makes his way back to 1985 in the first movie, he calls the homeless man Red. This has led fans to heavily speculate that Red Thomas and Red the Bum are the same person. However, despite this being a really fun idea for a theory, it sadly isn't true. Bob Gale himself has stated in the past that these two characters are not the same person, and he also said that Michael J. Fox ad-libbed the line. Not to mention that Red Thomas would be extremely old in 1985, and Red the Bum doesn't seem to be that old. Unless Red the Bum is the son of Red Thomas, this theory doesn't seem to be true. Doc Brown saves the world. A bonus feature on the 30th anniversary Back to the Future DVD, Doc Brown Saves the World was a short film featuring Doc Brown saving the world. In the short film, Doc Brown explains how a lot of the futuristic technology shown in Part 2 turned out to be very hazardous for humanity in the far future. Because of this, Doc Brown goes back in time to make sure that none of these horrible inventions were ever created in the first place in order to save humanity. This short film is a very fun explanation as to why 2015 wasn't as futuristic as we thought it would be. Doc Brown was suicidal. A very morbid theory, this one states that Doc Brown was suicidal in the first Back to the Future movie. The theory points to this scene where Doc drives the DeLorean at himself and Marty. Had the DeLorean not worked as intended, the outcome of the film would have been very different. This has led people to speculate that Doc Brown was suicidal in the first movie because if the DeLorean didn't work as intended, he didn't want to live with knowing that. It's stated in the movies that Doc Brown didn't have the best luck when it comes to making inventions, so maybe he didn't want to live with the failure of the time machine. But personally, I think Doc Brown was just confident enough in his work to actually risk his life for it. Here we are at the final entry of the Back to the Future iceberg, which may be our darkest entry yet. 9/11 predictions. Another video by the channel Barely Human, this theory actually has a lot of evidence proving that Back to the Future predicted 9/11. At the beginning of the movie, there is a terrorist attack at the Twin Pines Mall, and the Twin Pines represent the Twin Towers. At the end of the movie, after the terrorist attack, the Twin Pines Mall is now changed to the Lone Pine Mall, which is supposed to represent the One World Trade Center, the building that replaced the towers after 9/11. Believe it or not, in that same sequence there are not one, but two references to the number 9/11. And in the second movie, there's a scene where two trees are turned into the Twin Towers on a TV. This further confirms that the trees are meant to represent the towers. Another questionable detail about this scene is that they're watching TV and for some reason the Twin Towers are still present in 2015. But it gets even weirder when you consider that Back to the Future 2 takes place in October of 2015, and in late September of 2015, Robert Zemeckis, the director of Back to the Future, released a movie about the Twin Towers. There is more evidence and details, but I'm not going to mention everything here, otherwise this video would be unbelievably long. If you want to learn more about this theory and you want to see the original video, I will leave a link to it in the description. Unlike Barely Human's other video about John F. Kennedy, which I thought was ridiculous, I can't deny that this video provides a lot of good evidence proving that Back to the Future in a way predicted 9/11. In a way, it's actually really scary to see some of the symbolisms and comparisons in Back to the Future that relate to 9/11. For all we know, our favorite movies contain predictions for future disasters, and we won't know about them until those disasters actually happen. And because of the much darker and more mature subject matter of this entry, that's why I decided to make it the last entry of the iceberg.
But what does that mean?
It means your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. Both of you.
We will, Doc!
Stand back.
After 4 tiers of Back to the Future content, I could finally declare that the Back to the Future iceberg has been conquered. Thank you all so much for watching to the very end. Apologies for not getting this video out sooner, it's just that recently I've been doing a lot of other stuff and I've been focusing on other projects that don't really relate to YouTube. There's one project in particular that I've been working on a lot behind the scenes, and it doesn't have anything to do with YouTube, but it's been something that has been taking up a lot of my time and a lot of my efforts, so I just haven't been as passionate or wanting to spend time on YouTube as much as I used to. But I promise you that I will show you what that project I'm working on is whenever it is finished. I know there's not too many of you that watch my videos, but for the few that do and watch to the very end, I really appreciate it. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out some of my other stuff. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and God bless.